David thought his life was on track when he and Jenna, his vibrant pregnant girlfriend, excitedly awaited their baby. But beneath the surface, things were unraveling, secrets, lies, and an addiction tearing at the fabric of their future. With Jenna's gambling addiction draining their finances and trust eroding, David is forced to confront painful truths. As the birth of their child draws near, David's world spirals into uncertainty, leaving him wondering if their family can ever be whole. David had always prided himself on being a rational, responsible man. At 30, he had built a stable life as a software developer, working hard to create a secure future for himself and the woman he loved, Jenna. Jenna was everything David wasn't: spontaneous, full of life, and radiating a warmth that made him feel like anything was possible. When she announced that she was pregnant, it felt like their dreams were aligning perfectly. A baby, a family, a life together. They could handle anything, right? But beneath the surface, cracks were beginning to form. Small, almost imperceptible signs at first. Late bills, unexplained charges on their shared account. David, ever the optimist, brushed it off. Maybe it was just a rough patch. But when he stumbled across a payday loan notice tucked away in their drawer, his stomach sank. Jenna had been hiding things from him. The realization hit him hard. Was the woman he had built a future with really the person he thought she was? Or had there always been secrets lurking beneath her charming smile? David's heart raced as he confronted Jenna, his voice shaking with a mix of confusion and hurt. She didn't deny it, but the truth she revealed was more than he could have ever imagined. Jenna wasn't just struggling with finances, she was drowning in debt, and her gambling addiction was the dark force pulling her deeper into chaos. David's mind raced as he processed the weight of her confession. They were about to bring a child into this world, and yet, the foundation of their relationship had been shattered in an instant. The decision David made that night, kicking her out despite her being pregnant, was one of the hardest things he had ever done. He loved Jenna, but could he ever trust her again? Could a broken relationship ever be repaired, or had it already been irreparably damaged? David and Jenna had always shared a bond that seemed unbreakable. Their relationship, full of joy and optimism, had always felt like an unstoppable force. From spontaneous weekend getaways to quiet nights spent cooking dinner together, their lives were filled with love and laughter. But everything changed the day Jenna told David that she was pregnant. It was a moment of pure joy for both of them. A promise of a new beginning, a family, a shared future. David couldn't have been more excited. He started imagining what their life would look like once the baby arrived. They talked about names, baby clothes, and decorating the nursery. The future seemed bright, filled with endless possibilities. Jenna's smile, the way she looked at him with that familiar spark in her eyes, made David believe that nothing could go wrong. But the reality of their situation started to hit when Jenna began to withdraw, her once carefree attitude replaced with worry. She would hide her phone, avoid discussing money, and become distant whenever the topic came up. David, trusting that they would work through any issue together, assumed that stress about the baby was the cause. But then came the bills. Large, overdue bills. And then the payday loan notice. Something wasn't right. David tried to give Jenna the benefit of the doubt, but deep down, he knew something was off. The pregnancy, which should have been a joyous occasion, became overshadowed by these strange, troubling signs. Jenna's behavior, her refusal to discuss finances, made David question everything. Was there something more going on that she wasn't telling him? Was the life they were building together already on the verge of collapse? David's suspicion had been growing for weeks, and one evening, while tidying up the apartment, he stumbled upon something that sent his heart racing. Under a pile of laundry, buried deep in a drawer, was a receipt. Not just any receipt, but one that revealed a hidden debt, a loan that David hadn't been informed about. The number on it was staggering, far more than he had ever imagined. He stared at the paper, his mind racing. How could Jenna have done this to him? They had been so transparent with their finances, so careful about saving for their future. And yet, here she was, in secret, racking up debt that he was left to discover on his own. But that wasn't the worst part. As David dug deeper into the drawer, he found more. Pawnshop receipts, unopened letters from collection agencies, and, disturbingly, items he had never seen before. Expensive gadgets, jewelry, and a few items that clearly didn't belong in their home. Panic surged through him. Had Jenna been stealing from him? The thought was unbearable. He had always trusted her, believed in their future together. But now, it felt like he was looking at the fragments of a life that was built on lies. He couldn't breathe, his heart pounding in his chest as he tried to make sense of it all. The debts were mounting, and the stolen items were a clear sign that Jenna's addiction to gambling had spiraled out of control. David confronted Jenna that evening, his voice steady but laced with anger. She tried to explain, her face pale, eyes filled with tears. The truth poured out in a way that made David's stomach churn. She wasn't just struggling with money. She had been hiding her gambling addiction from him for months, maybe even longer. Every time she lost, she borrowed more money to cover her debts. Every time she hit rock bottom, she turned to risky behavior, hoping that one big win would solve everything. David felt betrayed, his world crashing down around him. How could she have kept this from him? And now, with their child on the way, how could they move forward when trust had been shattered in such a fundamental way? As David sat across from Jenna, his emotions were a whirlwind. The room was silent, except for the occasional sniffle from Jenna as she tried to compose herself. He had never seen her like this, vulnerable, broken, lost. It was hard to reconcile the woman sitting in front of him with the woman he had once fallen in love with, the woman who had announced her pregnancy with such joy and excitement. Jenna's voice cracked as she began to speak, her tears falling freely now. She confessed to David that her gambling wasn't just about addiction, it was about escape. She had always struggled with the pressure from her family. They were constantly demanding money, asking for help with debts, or trying to control her life. The constant strain of their financial burdens, coupled with her desire to be more than just another disappointment in their eyes, led her to make one desperate choice after another. She gambled, not because she wanted to, but because it was the only way she knew to cope with the overwhelming weight of her family's expectations. It was a dark, twisted cycle that she couldn't escape. Jenna admitted that she had hoped for a miracle, a big win to fix everything. But that hope had only driven her deeper into the hole. David listened, his heart torn between anger and sympathy. He had always thought that they could face anything together, but this was a betrayal on a level he hadn't prepared for. He had trusted her with his future, with their future, and now it felt like everything they had worked for was slipping away. Jenna's confession, though heartbreaking, only added to David's growing sense of doubt. He wanted to believe that she could change, that their baby could bring them back together. But the damage was done. The trust they once shared had been eroded by lies, addiction, and a web of secrecy. Could David ever truly forgive her? Or was it too late to fix what had been broken beyond repair? The nights were growing colder, and so were the walls around David's heart. Just when he thought he was starting to rebuild his trust in Jenna, another bombshell dropped. He had already discovered hidden debts, stolen items, and a gambling addiction. But nothing could have prepared him for the discovery of yet another payday loan, one that had been taken out despite their prior agreements. David had spent hours that morning going over their finances, trying to make sense of their mess, when he found it. Another loan, another attempt to bury the truth. This time, the amount was even larger than before, and David could feel his blood run cold. He confronted Jenna that night, his voice edged with a quiet fury that threatened to break through. She tried to apologize, to explain that this loan was different, that she was going to pay it off, that things would change. But David couldn't listen anymore. How many more times would she promise change? How many more times would she claim that this was the last time, only to make the same mistakes over and over again? His trust, already shattered, seemed beyond repair now. He had always tried to be patient, to understand the pressures she was under, but each new revelation only deepened the chasm between them. Jenna begged for another chance, pleading with him to believe her this time. But David couldn't shake the feeling that he was being deceived once again. Every time he looked at her, he saw the lies. Every promise felt hollow, and every apology seemed like a desperate attempt to keep him in the dark. The weight of betrayal crushed him, and yet in some twisted part of him, he still wanted to believe her. He wanted to believe that they could get through this together, but the constant deceit made it impossible. David stood there, torn between love and self-preservation, knowing that the decision he made now could determine the future of their family. Was it worth fighting for? Or was it time to walk away from a relationship that had already been broken beyond recognition? The worst fears David had been trying to avoid became his reality when he uncovered the missing money. It wasn't just the hidden loans, the stolen items, or the endless lies that had been poisoning their relationship. It was the sense that Jenna had been taking from him in ways he couldn't even fathom. The final straw came when he found evidence suggesting that money meant for their future, money they had saved together, was gone. At first, David thought it was a simple mistake, perhaps a miscommunication. But as he dug deeper into their bank statements, it became clear that this was no mistake. Money had been transferred without his knowledge, and the withdrawals were too frequent, too large to ignore. David confronted Jenna once again, his heart racing with a combination of fear, anger, and disbelief. This time, he wasn't just angry at her addiction or her financial irresponsibility. He felt a deep sense of betrayal. He had trusted her with everything, his heart, his future, and his finances. But now, it seemed like she had taken everything, even their shared hopes and dreams, and turned them into something unrecognizable. Jenna's face turned pale as she tried to explain herself, but David could see the cracks in her story. Her excuses seemed rehearsed, her tears no longer moving him. The evidence was clear, and it pointed to something far more sinister than he had ever imagined. Was Jenna stealing from him to fuel her addiction? Was the woman he had once trusted so completely capable of betraying him in such a fundamental way? David felt his stomach twist with suspicion, and his mind raced with questions. How could he have missed this? Had she been lying to him all along? He had always believed that their relationship could withstand anything, but now he was left wondering if he had ever really known the woman he had loved. As David faced Jenna, the reality of their situation hit him like a tidal wave. Trust, once the cornerstone of their relationship, was now completely gone. And with it, so was the hope that they could ever rebuild what they had. Was there any way forward for them? Or had Jenna's actions sealed their fate once and for all? The atmosphere in the apartment was thick with tension as David and Jenna faced each other in the dimly lit living room. His heart was pounding, his hands trembling with the weight of the betrayal he had just uncovered. Jenna stood there, her face pale, her eyes red from hours of crying, but David couldn't find it in himself to feel sympathy. The trust between them had been shattered so completely that all he could focus on now was the staggering reality of what had been happening behind his back. The accusations flew from David's lips, each word cutting deeper than the last. He asked how she could lie to him, how she could steal from him, how she could keep up the charade while their lives and their future were spiraling out of control. His voice cracked as he questioned everything, their love, their future, their plans to raise a child together. Was it all just a lie? Had she ever really cared about him at all? Jenna's tears flowed freely, her hands shaking as she tried to explain herself, but her words were lost in the flood of David's anger. I never meant for it to go this far, she sobbed. I was just trying to cope. I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't want you to leave me. I thought I could fix it. But David was beyond the point of hoping for explanations. He had been deceived too many times, and now all he felt was a mixture of anger, pain, and betrayal. He couldn't trust her anymore, no matter how hard she pleaded. The woman he once knew was gone, replaced by someone who had hidden secrets so deep that even David's best efforts couldn't uncover them in time. The emotional turmoil was unbearable for both of them. David felt the sharp sting of betrayal in his chest, and yet, in the quiet recesses of his mind, he wondered if Jenna truly understood the gravity of what she had done. She kept promising that things would change, that she would seek help for her addiction and make things right. But how could David believe her? How could he believe that anything would ever be different after all the lies? With a heavy heart and a sinking feeling in his stomach, David knew that the confrontation marked a point of no return. They couldn't go back to what they once had. The foundation of their relationship had crumbled, and now only pain and distrust remained. The birth of their son should have been a moment of joy, a fresh start, a new chapter for David and Jenna. But instead, the arrival of their child brought more questions than answers. The hospital room was quiet, save for the soft cries of the newborn. David held his son, his heart swelling with love and protectiveness. But as the newborn's tiny fingers wrapped around his hand, a wave of doubt washed over him. Could he truly be this child's father? Could he trust Jenna enough to believe that everything she had told him about the pregnancy was real? In the months following their son's birth, David found himself drowning in a sea of uncertainty. The walls of their apartment felt colder, the distance between him and Jenna growing with each passing day. The emotional strain of their troubled relationship weighed heavily on him. He had spent so much of his time trying to be there for her, trying to help her, and yet it never seemed to be enough. Every promise of change was shattered by another betrayal, another lie. He had to wonder, had she lied about everything? As the doubts gnawed at him, David made a decision that he knew would further strain their already fragile relationship. He planned to get a DNA test, something that had been lurking in the back of his mind ever since their son's birth. He couldn't shake the feeling that he needed certainty, that he had to know, once and for all, whether this child was truly his. It wasn't just about trust anymore. It was about protecting himself, about knowing whether he had been betrayed in the most intimate way imaginable. The thought of confronting Jenna with this request made David sick to his stomach. She would undoubtedly be hurt, furious even. But the doubts were suffocating him, and the only way to silence them was with the cold, hard truth. He wasn't sure if it would bring closure, but he knew he couldn't continue living in a relationship that was built on so many uncertainties. As he looked down at his son, the love and protectiveness he felt for the child were undeniable. But the question still lingered. Could he trust Jenna? And perhaps even more pressing, could he trust himself to make the right decision for the sake of his family? When David finally confronted Jenna about the DNA test, the atmosphere in their apartment was suffocating. The question had been hanging in the air for weeks, unspoken, but palpable. Now it was out in the open, and there was no turning back. Jenna's face drained of color as she listened to David's words. She had expected many things from their relationship, but this was different. This was the end of the line for her. David had hoped for answers, for clarity. But as Jenna's eyes welled up with tears and her voice shook with panic, he realized that this was the final test of their bond. Jenna tried to explain, but her words felt empty. "You don't trust me," she sobbed. "You never trusted me." The accusation cut through David, and for a moment he doubted himself. Had he gone too far? Was this truly necessary, or was it just another way to hurt her? But deep down, David knew he had to do this, for himself and for their son. The emotional roller coaster he had been on for months had left him battered and exhausted, and he needed to know whether he had been living a lie all this time. As painful as it was, the truth was the only way forward. Jenna's reaction was one of disbelief, almost as if she couldn't fathom why David was questioning her integrity. But as the conversation spiraled into arguments and accusations, it became clear. The trust was gone. Even if the DNA test showed that the baby was David's, the cracks in their relationship were too deep to ignore. David could no longer hold on to the hope that things would magically improve. Every day with Jenna had become a battle, one he was losing with each new revelation, with every stolen moment that he wasn't sure was real. As the days passed, David couldn't stop thinking about the test. Would it confirm his worst fears? Would it bring some semblance of closure? Or would it simply add more layers to the distrust that had already poisoned their connection? The results of the DNA test arrived 1 week later, and with them came a sense of finality that David wasn't sure he was prepared for. The test confirmed that he was indeed the biological father of their son, but the victory felt hollow. Yes, the doubts had been answered, but they had also confirmed something far more painful, that the emotional devastation between him and Jenna was irreversible. For weeks after the results came in, David was a man caught between two worlds. He loved his son, and he would do anything to provide for him and protect him. But as for his relationship with Jenna, the foundation of trust was shattered beyond repair. The lies, the deceit, the betrayal, they had all taken their toll on him. No matter how hard Jenna tried to convince him that she was ready to change, that she was committed to being a better partner and mother, David knew deep down that things could never go back to the way they were. The weight of his decision to stay or leave was crushing. The truth was, David no longer knew who Jenna was. He had seen so many different versions of her, each one more deceitful than the last, that he couldn't see a future where they could truly heal together. The emotional toll of trying to rebuild trust in a relationship that had been built on lies seemed insurmountable. After much soul-searching, David made the heart-wrenching decision to walk away. It wasn't a decision he made lightly, but he knew it was the only way to protect his own mental and emotional well-being. He knew he couldn't keep fighting for a relationship that was toxic and damaging, especially when it came at the expense of his own peace of mind. As he packed his bags, leaving the apartment that had once been their home, David thought about his son. He would always be there for him, no matter what. But as for Jenna, their journey together had come to an end. The road ahead would be uncertain, but David knew one thing. He was taking control of his future. Thank you for watching this emotional journey unfold. If you've ever faced betrayal, heartbreak, or struggled with trust, you're not alone. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe to my channel for more stories that dig deep into the complexities of relationships and the choices that shape our lives. Until next time, take care.